Hey people, welcome to the Run Testers. It's Kieran here, and if you're in the market for a running watch and you have decided that you're going to go for a Polar over a Garmin, but you're not really sure which one out of the Polar lineup would suit you best, then you've come to the right place because this video is for you. So from the entry-level M200 right up to the range-topping Polar Vantage V, we've tested all of them, and in this we're going to run you through the lot of them, the whole group of Polar's watches in their lineup. We'll take you through their strengths, their weaknesses, and we'll do all the important comparisons. We're going to help you decide which one suits you best, which ones you should buy, and also those that you should probably avoid. So let's take a look. So we're going to kick off with the Polar Vantage V2. It's the most expensive. It comes in at just short of £450 in the UK and just under $500 in the US. And this is the watch to buy if you want everything that Polar has to offer in a single device. So let's rattle you quickly through some of the key specs. Well, on paper, you've got a GPS battery life of 40 hours. You've got a low power GPS battery life that's extendable up to 100 hours. The V2 weighs 52 grams, which is pretty light. You've got a 100-meter water rating, which means, yeah, it's swim and shower and rain and sweat resistant. All of those things are covered. You've also got a slightly bigger casing, which is 47 by 47 mils. That's 1 millimeter bigger than the Polar Vantage V. You've also got a 240 by 240 pixel display. That's a 1.2-inch color touchscreen display. So this is Polar's all-singing, all-dancing, running and multi-sport watch. It comes with all the features that you'll find on all of the other Polar devices that they've ever launched. This is the complete set of tools you can have for running performance, recovery, training insights, sleep. All of those things are on this watch. The feature list goes on. It includes running power on the wrist, fuel-wise fueling recommendations. You've got hill splitter. You've got turn-by-turn navigation with that Komoot route planning. You've also got the VO2 max estimates. You've got the things like the running index score, training load pro that does cardio and muscular training load assessments, and training effect. Basically, everything that Polar does is here on the V2. It's a really, really accomplished watch. So beyond all the basics that you'd expect from a running watch at this price point, the Vantage V2 is actually also really big on recovery, sleep, and now fitness benchmarking and progress benchmarking. So you're going to get Recovery Pro, which is the heart rate variability based recovery measurement that you use a chest strap for. You will need a Polar chest strap to make that work. But you're also getting the option for nightly recharge, which is the automatic recovery measurement tool that you can do just with the optical heart rate. That's also on the GritX. You're also going to get Sleep Stages Plus, which is a super detailed sleep tracking tool. And you're going to get some new skills that only come on this watch. Now, one of them is a running performance test. It's a kind of maximal running test that sort of mimics a bit like a VO2 max test that lets you benchmark where you are at the moment and set things like your aerobic pace and power and heart rate zones on your watch, as well as giving you a heart rate max reading and giving you an arguably more accurate VO2 max estimate. That is a watch guided test, and it's an important new tool that Polar launched with the Vantage V2, and you only get it here. You're also only going to get the leg recovery test, which is a new way that Polar's got. It's a jump test, simple jump test that you do a couple of jumps to test how well your muscles are recovered. Before now, we've only been able to really look at how our cardio systems have recovered. This is Polar's attempt to bring muscles into play here by doing what is a popular lab-based test again, a jump test, to assess how well your muscles are recovered as well, which is another useful tool. When it comes to design, the V2 is actually a beautiful looking watch. It's sleek, it's light, it's got a lovely kind of almost one-piece casing here. It's got a nice bright colour touchscreen. Also, one of the really important things over the Vantage V, the buttons are now nicely responsive. The touchscreen is less laggy, and that's a huge improvement on the V. In our tests, the heart rate performance was on a par with the GritX and the V, though for all of these watches, we would recommend you use a chest strap to get the most out of them. They're not 100% reliable. There is some fluctuations and some sort of, it has a tendency a little bit to read some spikes and some high reads on runs. That's what we found in our tests. So GPS accuracy is really solid in full power. It was less so in low power mode where you're pulsing those satellites less frequently. In our tests over a marathon distance, the Vantage V2 actually clocked about 6 miles more than it should have. You know, we expect some variation when you're not using GPS at its highest rate, but that's a bit over and above for us. And the battery life was also a little bit of a letdown. So the GPS battery life in our tests only got 25 hours. That's way below the 40 hours that Polar claimed. Also in low power mode, we only managed to eke out about 32 hours. That's a long way off the 100 hours that was on paper. General usage battery life, we managed 5 days. That's again below the 7 days that we had claimed on paper. Other things that stand out here in comparison with the other watches, well, the V2 is the only watch now that comes with music control, so you can control Spotify, Deezer and other media apps on your phone from your wrist. There is no offline music, but music controls are here, and that is a bit of a step forward, takes it a bit more in line with some of the things that we're seeing Garmin do. So here's what we loved about the Polar Vantage V2. Well, the leg recovery test and that running performance test are bringing really good, useful new coaching insights to people who might not be able to get into a lab to do that for benchmarking fitness and measuring your recovery. Really useful, some of them quite unique. Also the FuelWise fueling recommendations, brilliant for endurance runners. If you're going marathon and beyond and you need a little bit of help working out how much to take on board and also when to take it, this is a really, really good guiding feature that we really enjoyed. And the other big thing that we loved is the fact that the buttons are now far more responsive and the touchscreen is far less laggy. So on to the misses. Well, that low power GPS accuracy was wildly out, and that was a bit of a worry for us, as was the battery life. We didn't get near the 100-hour battery life in low power mode, so that whole low power mode felt a little bit less useful than it really should be. So the other thing that we noticed, at least on my watch anyway, my screen picked up a couple of nicks just from general usage in the time that we were testing it, and that does kind of bring durability into a little bit of question. So that's the Vantage V2. You're going to buy this watch basically if you really want all of the deep level insights into your running performance, your recovery, your sleep, and you want some extra help with the coaching insights that you can get from things like the leg recovery and running performance tests. You're going to really be about squeezing out marginal gains here and really diving deep into your data. If you're just sort of a casual runner or you're not really that bothered about performance, then they're going to be watches that are going to be better for you. And you can also pick up some of the same features for a little bit cheaper. So if you're a bit tighter on budget, our next two watches are going to be worth watching. So the Polar Vantage V, the original, it's now obviously a little bit outdated. It comes in at just under £440 in the UK and just under $500 in the US. That's its RRP price, although it's worth noting that now, because the V2 has come out, you're going to be able to find this at much cheaper prices. So who's going to buy this? Well, you could buy this watch if you're going to be happy to have a premium multi-sport watch that isn't necessarily the very best and isn't perfect, but it's going to come at a really knockdown price. So as you'd expect from a top-of-the-range running watch, the V1 still is a mightily well-spec'd device. You're going to get a GPS battery life of 40 hours. There is no low-power GPS battery life extender mode available. That's only on the V2 or the Grit. It weighs 66 grams. It's a little bit heavier than the V2. Its water rating is only 50 meters, so that's 50 meters down on the V2, which is up to 100 meters. The screen size is still, you're still getting a 240 by 240 pixel 1.2 inch color touchscreen display. And when it comes to the features list, you're going to get quite a lot of the same tools that you'll find on the V2, only not quite as extensive. There are a few things that are obviously missing. A few upgrades that Polar have launched, they're not going to roll back to the V1. You're still getting running power on the wrist. You're still going to get things like Training Load Pro, Recovery Pro and Nightly Recharge, and the choice between those two. You're still going to get turn-by-turn navigation and route planning. You're still going to get things like your running index and your VO2 max estimates. All of the access to all of the training plans, all of those things that you'd expect on a top-of-the-range Polar watch are still there, though you will have to put up with slightly stiff buttons and a laggy touchscreen to make the most of those. That was one of our big bugbears with the original V. The buttons are really unresponsive. And obviously you won't get the new running performance and leg recovery test, or those music controls, and there's no weather reports on this watch. It's also important to say that it's not just things that are on the V2 that are going to be missing on the original V. There are things that came on the Grit X that won't appear here too. So there is no FuelWise and there is no hill splitter either. And we did ask Polar if any of those features from the V2 or the Grit X are going to be rolling back to the V1 at any time, and their answer was a big firm no. So how did the V perform against the rest up in our tests? Well, the regular GPS battery life slightly performed the V2 actually in our tests. And it actually had better staying power for that general usage. We got 6 days versus the V2's 5 days with a general kind of week of training. So that's actually a big plus for the V over the V2. There is no low power mode for GPS, so we couldn't test those. But yeah, battery life on the V is solid. So actually investing in something that might come at a bargain price is going to be good on that front. However, we'd really only recommend the V now if you can get it under £350. Some of you have already told us that you've been able to pick it up in places for as little as £250. And at that price point, actually, that is a total bargain. So if you can find it for that much and you can put up with those sort of slightly stiff buttons, missing a few of the newer features, you're still going to get a really, really great watch with the Vantage V with lots and lots of performance insights, recovery insights, training insights and skills that make it a competitive watch if you can find it at that cheap price. So what makes the Vantage V really good? Well, we loved that 40-hour solid GPS battery life, which was pretty reliable. We got close to that in our tests. We also love Recovery Pro. It's the most advanced recovery feature you can find, we think, on any watch out there. And we also love the fact that the Polar Vantage V offers brilliant sleep tracking. On the flip side, you're going to have to put up some negatives with the Vantage V if you go for it. The biggest of those are a laggy touchscreen and unresponsive buttons, which are super frustrating. You're also going to miss out on some of those really nice new features like fuel-wise, that leg recovery test and that running performance test. So if that's really important to you, then upgrading for the V2 is going to be the way to go. So that's the V1. It's still a good looking watch. It's still really well spec'd. It doesn't have everything that Polar has to offer now, and there are some bugbears that we had with it, which is the stiff buttons and an unresponsive touchscreen. But if you can find this for £250 or under £350, this is going to be a bargain. So that's one to watch if you'd like to go premium, but you haven't quite got the budget. So onto the Grit X, Polar's kind of most outdoors looking watch. It's £379 in the UK and it's $429.95 in the US. So the Grit X is the watch to buy if you're looking for an endurance watch that's got a slightly more outdoorsy look, a little bit more rugged. It has a strong battery life, 40 hours, extendable up to 100, and it comes in a little bit cheaper. But you're not that bothered actually about some of Polar's highest end kind of training and recovery smarts like Recovery Pro, and you don't really care about having music controls on the wrist. So the Grit X is Polar's most outdoorsy watch. It's edging closer towards something like a Fenix 6, although it's not really there in terms of that kind of rugged, robust design. It's very lightweight. Beyond this kind of rugged styling, there isn't actually much in the Grit X that isn't in the V2. The differences are very, very minimal. Let's take a look at the specs. So in terms of those key specs, you're getting a GPS battery life that's 40 hours. That's the same as the V2. A low power battery mode, which is extendable up to 100 hours. Again, the same as the V2. It's 64 grams, so it's a little bit more weighty on the wrist. You've got the same 100-meter water rating, and the screen is the same size, 240 by 240 pixel, 1.2-inch display. So for £70 less, you're still getting a lot. You're getting running power on the wrist, you're getting nightly recharge, you're going to get sleep stages plus, you're getting turn-by-turn navigation and route planning, you're also getting weather reports. What you don't get are music controls, you don't get any of the leg recovery and running performance tests. You also won't have Recovery Pro, that's only on the Vantage V2. Hardware-wise as well, you're not going to get the ambient light sensor that we've got on the V2, and that does mean that the Grit X screen is marginally dimmer than our tests than we found on the V2, but it's very close to cool. In terms of the GPS accuracy for distance and real-time pace, it performed amazingly close to the V2, not much to choose there, and actually the same can be said for the heart rate, where there was very little between these two. They both sort of had similar flaws. They both had a tendency to spike and occasionally to read a little bit high. So there's very little to choose here between those. And actually, for both of these, we'd recommend you have a chest strap anyway. That wouldn't be something that we would make a choice between the V2 and the Grit X on heart rate. Heart rate, not a deciding factor there. The same can't be said for battery life, because when it came to the Grit X, it performed marginally better than the V2 in full GPS mode, and also better in low power GPS mode. And also we got more general usage. So we had 33 hours GPS battery life in regular mode, we got 45 in low power mode, and we got 7 days general usage out of it. Well, that's with a kind of regular training week. So the things we loved about the Grit X, fuel-wise, brilliant. We love that. Fueling recommendations are really useful. We like the fact that it was lightweight and comfortable on the wrist, even though it's got a slightly more rugged look. And we also really like the way the battery life performed over and above some of the other Polar watches in this lineup. I guess on the downsides, when you're looking at comparing it to the V2, you're going to get no running performance or leg recovery tests. You're also missing music controls, and there's no Recovery Pro. So overall, there's a really sort of good argument that the V2 and the Grit X didn't really both need to exist aside from that slightly ruggedized look. They both offer very similar things. For £70 cheaper, there is a very good argument if you don't care about Recovery Pro, so sort of heart rate variability, kind of recovery readings, doing an orthostatic chest strap test. If that stuff doesn't really bother you, you're not really worried about having music controls on the wrist. There's a good argument to save £70 and go for a Grit X, where you're going to get a slightly better battery life, as we found in our tests, and a really, really decent watch for that money. Well, there's only one watch that comes in at the 200 to 300 pound bracket, at least at the list price, and that is the Polar Vantage M, which is £249 in the UK and $280 in the US. So this is the kind of watch that we think you should buy if you're looking for a really reliable running watch that does the basics really well, has a few bells and whistles, a really solid battery life, reliable heart rate, GPS accuracy, but also gives you room to grow. If you're a runner who maybe you're just starting running, but you know you're going to get the bug and you're going to be doing marathons back to back, in a year you're going to do more than one marathon or whatever, you're going to get deep into your training. This is a watch that will give you plenty of room to grow. So if you've got the money to invest in it now, that's a watch that will stay with you for a couple of years, if not more. So a quick look at the specs then. Well, the GPS battery life on paper is 30 hours. That's really, really solid at this price range. There is no low power GPS battery mode. It comes in at 45 grams. That's lighter than any of the watches that we've got on this list. Its water rating is 30 meters, so a little lower than the V and much lower than the Grit X or the Vantage V2, but still kind of good for running and for showers and for swimming. The screen is a 1.2 inch 240 by 240 pixel color display, although it's not touchscreen. So in our estimation, the Polar Vantage M is pretty much the Goldilocks watch. It's a little bit like our take on the Garmin Forerunner 245. This is a watch that kind of hits that sweet spot between having enough features for most runners without being overcomplicated, but also coming in at a price tag that's going to be palatable for more people. It's at the lower sort of end or mid-range really, but is a more affordable watch than the premium watches that you'll find. So you're not going to get any of the bells and whistles features that you'll find on the higher end watches like fuel-wise, hill splitter, and those things, but you do still have a really strong feature set. So you're going to get all of the running essentials. On top of that, you're going to have things like extras like FitSpark, workout recommendations, which is really handy if you're just starting out and you're not really sure what training to do back to back. This will help guide you through some of that and take you from a level of unfitness to fitness. That's really good. Nightly recharges here. And you're also getting Training Load Pro thrown in so you can see what your training load is over time. You can see how your training is stacking up. Again, it's a useful feature for people who might be starting out, who don't want to go into the sort of overtraining world or doing too much too soon. So from a hardware perspective, there are a couple of major differences here with the Vantage M to the V and the V2 and the Grit X. There's no touchscreen, although we've mentioned quite a lot of times that some of the touchscreens on those watches can be a bit laggy, and we don't find that to be a big miss. The button controls are fine. The other thing, there is no built-in barometer, and what that means is that you don't get running power on the wrist from the Vantage M because the running power calculation relies heavily on a barometer in order to do that. When it comes to heart rate accuracy, we had a bit of a mixed bag actually. On some runs, it matched a Polar H10 chest strap beat for beat. It was perfect, spot on, really reliable performance. On others, it was a little bit wildly out. The other thing that's really interesting to say is that between the run testers, we actually had different experiences. Mike was really, really happy with the way the heart rate performed for him. It was consistent throughout all of his tests, where I found there were a few runs where it just went a little bit squiffy. But again here, at the price that you might be able to pick up the Vantage M for, you might even be able to layer on a H10 chest strap, and that is definitely going to boost the accuracy of your stats overall, and that's worth a look. In our battery life tests, we found the Polar Vantage M to be excellent, actually really, really good performer on this front. It came very close to that 30-hour claimed full GPS battery life. We got 28 hours. There isn't a low power battery life, so we didn't test that. And in general usage, actually, this was one that it just didn't seem to want to die. It went for longer than any other Polar watch we've tested. We got 7 days plus out of this. It actually beat the claim on paper. So all round thumbs up for the Vantage M when it comes to battery life. And that is another big tick in the box here for a watch that's much cheaper than some of the higher end ones. So here's what we loved. It's lightweight and comfortable on the wrist. It was pretty reliable in terms of the stats and the tracking. And also it's got a really, really good battery life. Final thing, it's great value. So things that we didn't like include the fact that the screen's a little bit dimmer. It's not quite as bright as it might be. Also, you're not getting running power on the wrist. You need an additional sensor to do that. And also you're going to lack some of the really interesting features like fuel-wise, hill splitter, and there's no turn-by-turn navigation. But if you can live without those, you're going to get a watch at a decent price here. So the Vantage M undeniably is not as capable as the brand new V2, the V, or the Grit X, but it is a really solid, reliable performer with a really good battery life. It's also one that you should definitely consider if you're thinking about something like a Garmin Forerunner 245. It's right at that sweet spot if you're sort of pretty serious about your running, or you're beginning and you think you're going to grow to become a serious runner and you don't want to go crazy spending silly money on a watch. This is one that should definitely be on the list and you should check it out. So we're now getting into the more affordable end of the Polar lineup, and we're looking at watches like the Polar Ignite, the Polar Unite, the M430, which is a little bit old, and also the M200. Now the Polar Ignite comes in at £17,450 in the UK. It's just shy of $230 in the US. The Polar Ignite is a watch that you're going to buy if you're more into your general fitness and you use running as part of your overall fitness and general health practice, rather than somebody who is necessarily purely chasing times, finish lines, and running performance. It's a bit more of an all-rounder. It's actually really a fitness watch. So if you're looking for something that can support your general approach to getting fitter, then the Ignite is probably a watch that's going to be more tailored to you. So let's take a quick look at those on-paper specs. You're getting 17 hours of GPS battery life. There is no low-power GPS mode. It comes in at 35 grams, and that is super light and actually makes it very comfortable to wear all day long. It's got a water rating of 30 meters. Again, we had no problems with it with showering, swimming, sweating, all of those things are covered. And the screen, you get a 240 by 204 pixel resolution screen, which is slightly lower than some of the higher end Polar watches. So everything you'd expect from a run tracker is there, including built-in optical heart rate and built-in GPS. You're also going to get heart rate and speed zone training with guidance on the wrist. Plus, it's got a really nice minimal design that definitely suits kind of smaller wrists. So if you like a lighter watch and you do have a smaller wrist, this is one that's probably a fairly good option. It's got a bright, readable color display. There's a solid battery life. And you also get kind of read-only smartwatch notifications, moving it into the smartwatch territory a little bit. FitSpot workout recommendations, you get Sleep Stages Plus, you're going to get nightly recharge. There is the basic fitness test, lying fitness test. It's not lying about how fit you are, you do it when you're lying down. There is running index and VO2 max estimates, as you'll find on some of the higher end watches. And also you're going to get training benefit in Polar Flow, and you'll get Training Load Pro readouts too. So as we've said, this is a bit of a fitness watch, and actually those FitSpot workout recommendations will really come into their own at this price bracket if you're someone who needs a little bit of a nudge and a help moving from sort of less fit to more generally fit, because those recommendations coming in daily can help you with A, with motivation, B, with teaching you kind of what kind of training and intensity you should run at and for how long, but also it's sort of a help to help you avoid overtraining. So, you know, people who are probably a little bit more used to managing their own coaching plans or basically have a coach won't necessarily find that useful. But at this kind of level, this watch is quite interesting for people who may be beginners moving up that tree. So GPS performance was pretty solid in our test. Actually, it was a close match for much pricier watches like a Garmin 4 and a 945. The assisted GPS technology that you get in here, even at this kind of lower price point, really helps you get a quick fix. So when we tested the optical heart rate sensor against the H10 chest strap, actually we found on this watch it tended to read a little bit higher than the H10, but you know, that's fairly standard for a lot of the optical heart rate sensors that we've tested across lots of different watches from different brands. And the battery life performance on the Ignite was actually pretty mixed. In our tests with the screen set to always on, which is something that we found that we preferred to do rather than have to do the raise to wake, which was a little bit slow at times to respond. Make it easy to see your stats whilst you're running. So that always on screen, we only got 5 hours GPS runtime. With it off, we squeezed out a little bit more, but still short of the 17-hour billing that Polar put up there. In terms of the low power battery life, that's not featured here either on the Ignite. This doesn't happen at this price range. And in terms of general usage, we pretty much got the 7 days, so we were fairly happy with that. So the positives for the Polar Ignite, it's a really nice lightweight watch. It's got a nice, sleek, elegant design, and it's got a nice bright screen. On the flip side, some negative things. There is only one button, so you've got very limited button controls. That means you're over-reliant really on the touchscreen, which isn't quite as responsive as perhaps we'd like, and also not great for when you're on the move and you're running and you want to look through things. It's not ideal. We much prefer buttons. Actually, a bit of sweat gets on the screen and it's very difficult to control. So another thing we didn't like was that there was a rapid screen timeout, and actually the raise to wake was sometimes quite laggy. So we ended up putting always on during workouts, and that seemed to drain the battery life quite quickly. So overall, the Ignite, for under £200, you're getting quite a lot of watch here, even though it's not perfect. No button controls was a bit of a problem for us. You know, but slightly laggy touchscreen, a few problems with the raise to wake, and we had a few problems with the battery drain. But at kind of £174, you're still getting a lot of watch for that money. And if you can't quite stretch to the Polar Vantage M, which we'd probably recommend over this if you can, then this is a reasonable option. Now, the other people that we think this would be really good for, if you're sort of running for cardio rather than actually running for sort of running performance sake, and you know, you use running as sort of part of a general fitness, then I think the Ignite could sit nicely into your overall fitness regime. It's got some wider fitness skills and recovery skills that kind of suit that kind of approach to running rather than someone who's a really sort of serious, dedicated runner. Another watch keeping the Polar Ignite company in this category is the Polar Unite, and it comes in at £134 and $150. Now this is the watch that you're going to buy if you really don't care about having built-in GPS, because it doesn't have that, and you can't afford the Ignite. If you can afford the Ignite, buy the Ignite. So in many ways the Unite is actually really like the Ignite Lite. It looks quite like it, although it comes with a cheaper build and it carries many of the same features. But the biggest headline here really is the lack of GPS. There is no built-in GPS with the Unite, which is a big shout from Polar. We questioned why they did that, maybe to keep the price down, but actually in similar devices, Fitbit Charge 4, watches at this price range is just adding GPS, and it's sort of like a hygiene factor now. So that would be one of the reasons we would sort of say, really, if you can avoid buying the Unite, you really should. What it means is actually that you have to carry your phone with you and get connected GPS. So you're wedded to taking your phone on runs with you. Some people aren't going to like that. And what we also found was that kind of phone to watch connection didn't always happen immediately when we stepped out to run. It wasn't always reliable. So a quick rattle through the key specs for the Polar Unite. You're going to get 50 hours GPS battery life on paper. There is no low power GPS mode. It comes in at 32 grams, so that's pretty light. You've got a water rating of 30 meters, and you've got a 240 by 204 pixel resolution display. The feature set here is fairly solid. You're getting nightly recharge, you'll get sleep stages plus, you're going to get training benefits, you will get your running index and your VO2 max estimates. You can get adaptive training plans. So there's quite a lot going on here. FitSpark workout recommendations are there too. So there's quite a lot going on with the Unite. It's just that GPS missing is a big problem for us. So the optical heart rate sensor accuracy was kind of okay, although we had some weird anomalies on a couple of runs where it just didn't start recording heart rate until, quite a way into the run. So that skewed our kind of averages and our maxes. There was also the odd tendency to kind of spike and for it to play a bit of catch up when we sort of shifted up the gears. But, that is something that we found pretty much across all of the Polar heart rate tracking devices and other optical heart rate running watches to boot. So when it came to the GPS performance, you're obviously piggybacking your phone, and it's reliant on your phone's GPS, powers as well as the watch and how it sort of works in terms of that syncing. But we found that GPS was regularly a long way out. It massively overread, and you're definitely trading GPS accuracy here for that low price point. So in our battery life tests, the connected GPS battery life supposed to be 50 hours. We found it way below, particularly because we had the same problem that we had with the Ignite, where we found we wanted to have the always on display on whilst running. And that again gave us about 5 hours of connected GPS, maybe squeezing up to 6 if we were lucky. You'd probably get more than that if you turned off the always on, but we prefer to run with it that way. And in general usage, actually, we got about 3.5 days out of that for a regular kind of training profile. So positives with the Unite. It's light, it's good on the wrist. Get FitSpark workout recommendations, which are useful if you're just starting out on your fitness journey. And also you've got really good kind of deep level nightly recharge and sleep tracking. That's a really big positive feature here. And then on the downsides, and these are for us pretty much deal breakers, there's no built-in GPS. That was a big problem. It's raised to wake again, and the touchscreen kind of felt laggy, and you've only got one single button control like you have with the Ignite, which we find a little bit troublesome. So our take on the Polar Unite, well, up against the Ignite, it's no contest. If you can afford to get the Ignite, get it. We'd even say, look, hold out for a deal on the Ignite. Those prices should drop. There's only about £40 to choose actually at the recommended list price, and you're gonna look, if you look hard enough, you will find a deal. Get the Ignite. The addition of the GPS built in is a big difference, and it really makes that watch so much better. So now we're delving back into a little bit into Polar's retro catalogue, although these are still available. The Polar M200 comes in at just under $200 and £174, but it's old and it's a goodie. And actually that's its list price, and we think you might be able to find this kind of even under £100 if you keep looking around. It is basic, it is retro, and you're going to only buy this really if you're happy with really sort of retro old school. The design is quite chunky, you've got an old digital display, but behind that digital display and that retro look and feel, you've actually got some really, really solid basic running features that if you're just looking for a running watch that does the basics well, is pretty reliable with a pretty decent battery life, then the M430 might be it. at a bargain price. So the M430 is the precursor to the new Vantage M. It was originally launched back in 2017, and then it was one of the most popular running watches that Polar had on sale. It goes without saying that things have moved on a lot since then, and this is really, really no frills. So into those key specs, well, you're only going to get 8 hours GPS battery life. That was how battery life was back in the day in 2017. It weighs 51 grams, which is quite chunky. And it's got a water rating which reads suitable for swimming. It's not actually even been given a meterage. The screen is a 128 by 128 pixel display, and it is very retro graphics. So what you do get is built-in GPS and optical heart rate, and you get all of the kind of regular run tracking that you'd expect. You know, if you're used to using an app and you're looking to upgrade a bit, this will cover everything that you get in an app and more. You get heart rate zone training, you get speed and pace zones, and you also get kind of back to start navigation, which is a surprise. We forgot we even had that on the M430. The other training features include training load, training benefit, you get recovery status, that's kind of recommended recovery time. You're going to get sleep tracking, but not sleep stages plus, like you get on the higher end watches. And you'll get everything like your running index scores and your VO2 max estimates, which are pretty much a mainstay of Polar's offering. There is that lying down fitness test, and you can also access those adaptive training plans. So there's a lot going on here in the M430. If you can get over that kind of retro build and it's sort of slightly old school display, and of course that lower kind of GPS battery life. In our test, the heart rate on the M430 was okay. It did have a tendency to take a little while to settle down. For the first portions of runs, it tracked, but it was very high. That used to be the case actually a lot more with older running watches, and that was very much the case with the M430. GPS was also solid. You know, we tested the M430 skills actually over 4 set marked courses from a 5K up to a 120 kilometer ultra marathon, and it really worked really well. It hit the kilometer marks that were marked on the course really well and came up very close in overall distance. So GPS performance was really solid on the M430 too. And when it comes to that tested sort of battery life, we got 8 hours out of it. There is no low power battery life mode, and the general usage battery that we got from it was around 5 days of regular kind of training. So hits with the M430, it's really basic and easy to use if you like that. This is no frills, there's no complications that come with those no frills though, and you get a fairly reliable GPS and heart rate performance too. Things you might not like, it's not the best looking watch. Things have definitely moved on in running watch world since the M430 launched. It's not the most comfortable. And one final thing, we really hated the charging cable that popped out all the time. It's not that, but now you've got the M series, you've got this nice little disc that it clips on. This watch we found often fell out, with the M430, we found that it often fell off the charging cable whilst it was plugged in out the wall. So our take on the M430, if you're happy to step back a generation of watches, and by step back a generation, it feels like you're going back into a sort of slightly different past watch world, then the M430 offers quite a lot of features, relatively decent performance in terms of, you know, GPS reliability and heart rate reliability. It hasn't got a killer battery life, but there's kind of enough to get you through, just about to get you through kind of a week's worth of training, maybe on one charge. And if you can find it for under £100, then it's definitely the one to go for. And we're going to look at the M200 now and tell you why it beats that watch. So last of all, we've got the Polar M200. Now this one comes in at £130 and $150. That's its list price, but actually you'll be able to find this, in the UK at least, we found it for £99, hence we got it in the sub 100 category, and we've got it up there really up against the M430. The M430 a little bit more expensive generally, but you can also occasionally find this at £99 too. So beyond the basic running metrics, the features here on the M200 include training benefit, training load but not training load pro. There is running index, and you'll get a VO2 max score, and you get adaptive training plans for everything from the 5K to the marathon. So you've got some of those sort of essentials, really, the hygiene things that Polar puts into all of its running watches are here on the M200. That might be enough for some people. It also has sleep and activity tracking, though you're not going to get the sleep stages plus that you'll get on those higher end watches on the pricier Polars. So let's dive quickly into the on-paper specs. 6 hours of GPS battery life. There's no low power mode. It weighs 44 grams. It's suitable for swimming, and the screen is 1342 pixels. You know, GPS performance here is solid enough, and the heart rate, that built-in optical heart rate, did well enough up against the chest strap, if not remarkably, but at this price point, hey-ho. The battery life claims lived up to the performance that was listed, though it falls way short of the other watches on this list. So you're going to get 6 hours of GPS battery life, There's no low power GPS mode as you'd expect, and you're going to get about 5 days general usage from this watch. So things we were fond of, we're not going to go be as strong as love with the Polar M200, but things we were fond of with the M200, it's cheap, it's got built-in GPS and heart rate, and at that cheap price point, that's a win. It's really simple and basic, so if that's what you're after, and some people really love that, this would be a good watch for you. If you really just want no frills simplicity, then this does have it in spades. And then onto the misses, well, this is really old school. It's very, very retro. It's not got a great battery life, and it's also got a pretty poor screen. So just to reiterate, really, as far as the M200 is concerned in the lineup, we'd really only suggest this if you really don't care about having the most basic watch. And even then, we'd argue that if you can hang out to find a deal on the M430, you're going to get a similarly sort of basic watch in terms of its presentation, its retro feel, but just you'll get a lot more kind of features on there that you might want to drop into. You know, it's useful to have those even if you don't use them. So there you have it. That is our very quick run through of all of the Polar watches in the Polar lineup. Every running watch they do is there, and you can now hopefully decide which one is right for you. If we've missed anything or you have any questions, please ask us in the comments below. We'll always reply to as many of these questions as we can when we have the time. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have got other reviews here of Polar products that go a little bit more in depth. If we've been very light on the detail here, but we've got reviews all the way around this channel. Check it out and dive in deeper to things like the Grit X, the Vantage V2, other comparisons. Yeah, so go fill your boots. We'll hope to see you again soon on the Run Testers. Thank you. I've been Kieran. I will see you again.